Hello everyone, this is Otis, W4IOD, and for those accustomed to hearing me on the radio, yes, I am recording this live from Stamping Ground, Kentucky, the Tornado Alley of Scott County. Typically, when I put together a presentation, it's usually for local club use, and we either present it to the club at a special event, a club meeting, or at field day. But at the urging of several local club members, I've put this presentation together due to an influx of new members and for folks that are not exactly accustomed to working with the digital modes, not only WiresX, but the other modes as well. But typically, we do this at one of the club meetings, but at their urging and with some issues with me and my health as far as being able to travel very far, my good friend Chris, K9EQ, suggested that I put an audio track with the presentation and make a video out of it. So you can thank Chris, K9EQ, for my voice, and just be thankful you don't have to look at my face. So at this point, let's get to business at hand. This presentation is going to cover good operating practices for fusion repeaters and nodes. So starting things off, I will ask you a question. How do you eat an elephant? How do you eat an elephant? Well, if you've ever heard the old adage, don't bite off more than you can chew, you'll probably know the answer to this one. One bite at a time. So basically what I'm telling you is don't stress out about trying to learn everything all at once. Don't try to learn everything all at once. Instead, learn one part at a time, and then once you got that, move on. So for you folks that are either newly licensed or have no experience talking on the digital side of things through a link system like WiresX, there's some basics that we will cover, and I have to thank my good friend Chuck, N0YQ, for his guidance on this project. I can't say enough about Chuck. He is an excellent asset in regards to this, and one of the best net controls I've ever had the opportunity to work with. So we'll start out with Know Your Radio, and what I mean by that, most folks buy a Yaesu System Fusion radio, and it comes new in the box, and it's got several different things in there: the antenna, the battery, the radio, sometimes various European power supply adapters, the wall wart, etc., and one manual, and it's the operator's manual. And most folks look for answers in that. What's this button do? What's this GM button do? What's this DX button do? And they find some answers, but it won't answer all their questions. That's because you don't have all the manuals for your particular radio, because all of them wouldn't fit in the box. So what Yaesu has chose to do is to give you the basic operator's manual, and the rest of the manuals for your particular radio can be found at yaesu.com. So you go to yaesu.com, you click on digital, you scroll across to your particular radio, you click on that, and then when the page opens under the Files tab, that's where you will find the different and various manuals for your particular radio, depending on what you would like to learn. I think it would be a good idea to probably download all of the manuals. There's some additional files there as well. Some of them are firmware, and I'm not going to get into that in this presentation, but it is always a good idea to make sure that you have the latest and greatest firmware installed on your radio, but that's a completely different topic. And there's also some free programming software along with some product brochures and what have you. So that will cover getting to know your radio, everything you need to know. And a lot of this information is available online at HAMOPERATOR.com, all one word, under Fusion Help, tips and tricks. That is an excellent resource that my good friend Chris, K9EQ, keeps up to date, and we're appreciative of that. So let's start out with listen before you talk. When you first power on your radio, please check the volume setting to be sure that you can hear any activity on the repeater. And when you're ready to use the repeater node, be sure to listen before pressing the push to talk. Before you do that, there's a couple things we need to check. DN mode, which is Delta November, is the preferred mode when transmitting within the WiresX system, as it allows for GPS information and the forward error correction, which is FEC, as opposed to the VW mode, which dedicates the entire 12.5 kilohertz to audio, which will result in you having a hotter audio signal. In other words, you're going to be louder than everybody else that's running DN mode. If you're running an HT, there's a known issue with the audio being hotter on the digital side, which means for most folks, the microphone gain is going to have to be set at 3 or 4 when you're in the DN mode, rather than the 5 and above setting typically used on the analog. This setting will also apply to the discontinued radios of the FTM 3200, the 3207, and the FTM 7250 mobile radios. So on those, you should try the lowest mic gain setting first, as that seems to be sufficient for C4 FM. And then if you have a hand microphone, either the MH48 or the SSM 85D, rather than talking directly into the microphone, turn the microphone sideways and talk into the push-to-talk switch across the microphone. Now, the reason being because you're going from 25 kilohertz down to 12.5, you're compressing everything. And as you do that, it makes your microphone extremely sensitive. So any breath pops coming across that microphone is going to be transmitted out into the system. So what we found is talking across the microphone rather than directly into it, more pleasing audio for your fellow amateur radio operators to listen to, because it will pick up the breath pops. When you key your microphone, pause for a second or two. And the reason you're doing that's not only true on digital, any link system, analog, all-star, IRLP, what have you. You pause to allow all the links to come up, and at the end of your transmission, hold it down for a couple of seconds to allow your transmission to pass to all the stations on the WiresX network. Station identification. A lot of folks ask me about that because I am a VE with several different affiliated organizations, and we're not going to get into the FCC requirement and all that as far as why you don't have to transmit your call sign on repeaters, and that's not what this is about. We'll just tell you good general operating practices and the reason behind that. So first of all, when you get your radio and you enter your call sign, legally from the FCC standpoint, you're covered. And the same thing on the repeaters. That's why the digital WiresX repeaters, C4 FM on System Fusion, do not have to ID the way they do on the analog. But upon discussion, we came up with some good operating practices. And for a lot of us, this is just going to make sense. So initially transmitting on the repeater, you should identify with your call sign, and additionally every 10 minutes thereafter, keeping in mind that the nodes, the repeaters, the bridges, some of them actually come out on analog systems, and it's one of the things that a lot of folks overlook, the fact that some of the amateur operators that you're on the system with are visually impaired. They cannot see your call sign on their display. So it's just courtesy, good amateur practice to not only identify yourself initially when you get on the system, but every 10 minutes thereafter. And when you end a QSO, just go ahead and sign off with your call like you do anywhere else. Despite it not being required, we found that's just being courteous and considerate to your fellow amateur radio operators. Next up is leaving pauses between transmission. Now, why would you want to do that? WiresX nodes and repeaters are in a linked system, just like IRLP, All-Star, anything linked, and you're subject to the latency associated with the internet. So it's one of those things where quick keying, don't do that. Allow a pause of 2 to 3 seconds. This will allow all your traffic to be passed along to the other repeaters and nodes. It also allows other stations the opportunity to join in or announce that they are there. So it's just good practice to leave a 2 or 3 second pause in that. And I'm guilty of that from time to time myself, a quick keying. It's just not recommended. There is no courtesy tone, so you're going to have to wait for the repeater to completely drop and then pause those 3 seconds for all the links to unkey. Because if you don't, as my friend Will, KB4PTJ, will inform you, it won't allow all the repeaters on a linked system to drop, and you'll end up causing a repeater timeout. This will also allow someone that would like to disconnect the node from the room to actually disconnect. Because on the WiresX system, to disconnect, you have to have 2 or 3 seconds for no transmission for them to disconnect from the room. So just good practice to leave a 3 second gap in between the key up. When you're in a Roundtable QSO, allow for a little bit longer break to give others a chance to join in and announce the break, so others in the Roundtable know that this is the time to let a breaking station join in. And I probably have some questions as Roundtable QSO, never heard of it. We'll discuss that a little bit more in detail after we finish this section, so everyone will fully understand what a Roundtable QSO is. The next up is testing repeater access. And my good friend Jerry Schaus, K4TG, is going to appreciate the fact that I included this in this presentation. Don't just key up and chunk the repeater without identifying yourself. It's one of those things where it seems to strike a nerve with Jerry, and I understand as a repeater owner, it's one of those things that pushes his buttons, and it's not good amateur practice to do it. So if you're going to do it, key up and go testing. This is W4IOD testing. If you'd like a signal report from another station, please state that. Key the microphone, wait a couple of seconds, and say, this is W4IOD. Can someone please give me a signal report? Just like on an analog repeater, it's not a good idea to operate APRS. On the System Fusion network, it's a good idea not to run GM mode. And that's that GM button on the System Fusion radio, and that stands for group monitor. Basically what that does is it puts your radio into a beaconing mode where your call sign is transmitted out every 15 seconds. And I'll be doing a separate presentation on group monitor if you're interested in learning about that. But I've had some folks that want to argue with me that that is not going out on the repeater. Yes, it is. It's not going out on the WiresX system. But if you have that engaged and you are on the repeater frequency, it is keying the repeater, and every station is receiving that every 15 seconds. So that was actually set up for Simple X. Basically, the folks in Japan do not have repeaters, and that is a big function in Japan, and it is a function that is utilized here in the United States as well. But I'll do a separate presentation on group monitor mode for those that would like to learn that. Also, it's not a good idea to check antenna, SWR, or do other equipment checks on the repeater frequency. Please move to a Simple X frequency or use a dummy load. Now, from time to time, we all like to show off, and you might want to demonstrate the capabilities of your amateur radio or local WiresX repeater to a non-amateur. The typical way to do this is ask for a demo. And the way you do a demo is key the microphone, wait a couple seconds, say this is W4IOD for a demonstration. Anybody on frequency that is listening to me can actually answer me. If you answer such a call, just give the calling party your name, your call sign, your location. And as he's advertising, he's not looking for a QSO. I've got someone in the room with me I am demonstrating this with. So be considerate of that, as I'm sure they'd like to get back to their in-person traffic they have there with them. So that's a demonstration. All right, making a call. Just say your call sign. You don't need to call CQ, CQ, CQ. Do not use the word break to get into a conversation. Break is reserved for announcing emergencies. If you're trying to contact a specific station, you should announce, and a lot of folks get this confused. It's the call sign of the station being called, and then your call sign. So, for an example, N0YQ this is W4IOD, how copy. That is how that's done. Your call sign is stated after the station you want to call. If you do not get an answer after a couple calls, announce your call sign clear. Example, nothing heard. This is W4IOD clear. What this does, it lets everyone listening know that you've released the repeater for others to use. So that's how that's done. If the repeater is already in use, please wait for a pause between transmissions to announce your call. If you want to contact another station not in the current conversation, ask if you can make a call. Make your call when the party's using the repeater, turn the repeater over to you. If you contact the party that you are seeking, turn the repeater back to the person who turned it over to you and thank them for letting you in. That's just common courtesy. It's good amateur practice, but it's just being courteous. And please move to another frequency to hold your conversation, no matter how short you think it may take. The repeater was in use. Your fellow amateur operators allowed you in to make the call. So take your QSO to another frequency. Something to keep in mind, just be respectful. If you don't get a response from the party you were calling, turn the repeater back to the person who turned it over to you and thank them again for letting you in. Now, when you hear someone making a call to a specific station, it is not polite or good amateur practice to transmit and announce your call sign when they're calling for a specific station. Please be respectful and allow the calling station to attempt to make contact to his or her station before putting your call sign out there on the air saying you are listening. That's just good amateur practice. All right, let's go back and actually discuss roundtables. I mentioned that earlier, and we'll discuss roundtables. Roundtables is a group of individuals that are talking on the repeater, and there is a set order established to avoid doubling. So it goes around, if you will, hence the word roundtable. So when a new station enters a roundtable, the station's already using the repeater, and the next station in rotation should acknowledge the new station and turn it over to them and let them know where they are in the rotation. You should also indicate who they should turn it over to in order to keep the rotation intact. Remember to give your actual name. This is W4IOD. Everyone calls me Odie. That's my introduction on the roundtable. So when you enter a roundtable, your call sign and your name so everyone becomes familiar with you. Now, when you're in a roundtable discussion, just remember, practice turning the repeater over to the next party. So don't assume everybody will remember when it's their turn. So if it's my turn to pass it over, I'll finish my QSO by saying, over to you, N0YQ. Don't assume everybody will remember when it's their turn. They won't. Failure to turn it over to the next station can cause confusion and lead to doubling with another station. So that's pretty much the roundtable. It's just an order that everyone goes in to avoid doubling, and it works quite well when everyone follows over to you. And it goes around until somebody leaves, and then you reassign the order. So let's talk a little bit about nets. When a repeater is running an emergency net, or any type of net for that matter, all traffic will go through net control station, and all normal repeater use will be suspended until the end of the net. You just don't jump on a repeater and run a net. So you've always got to ask permission from the repeater owner or the trustee before conducting any type of net. When running a net on a WiresX system, you've got to leave the longer pauses, and about every third or fourth round, leave 5 to 10 seconds for every, that way every repeater and node can catch up and they don't time out. Again, the pro word break is reserved for announcing emergencies. And since we're on the subject of nets, I'll go ahead and throw these comments, not that it applies to the System Fusion network, but typically a lot of the local clubs have their Aries net or emergency nets locally on the analog repeaters that are not linked. And why doing that is a good idea. It tests the equipment and the net control operator's ability to conduct a net. One of the things that I hear on a weekly basis is stations that are checking in that continually doubling with each other. And that and the fact that they want to say their call sign so fast that net control has no chance to copy it or write that down. And I think that is an educational issue, or the fact that the individual doing that has never called a net. And I would invite you to not say just because you can say your call sign that fast, don't do it. Be respectful and considerate to the individual that's actually calling the net. Speak slow, state your name, your call sign, and all that slowly so it can be understood and copied. That is a no-no. That one thing that irks me is when you have stations check in. This is W4IOD. Just because I can say it that fast doesn't mean net control can, 1, hear it, 2, copy it that fast. So when checking in, actually exercise some respect for net control. It's your call sign, both alphanumeric and phonetically, your name and your location. And say it slow where net control can copy it. The other thing is the doubling. Those with a military background, such as myself, or have been involved in Mars, we were actually trained to use a pro word to establish the frequency is clear in regards to transmitting. So with that pro word, it's either this is, and then you unkey to make sure you have the frequency, then you check in with your call sign, or net control, then you unkey. And I've heard stations actually try to do this. They just never unkey net control and right on to the call sign. They don't unkey to establish the fact that the frequency is clear. So if you're going to use a pro word, which drives my friend Daryl over there in Winchester, Kentucky, AC4YD, nuts, keep in mind what that's established for, is to establish that the frequency is clear and you're not doubling with another station before giving net control your call sign. And I've actually heard a few that will go net control and then unkey and actually wait for net control to answer them. Well, that's entirely up to the net control operator, but that's not what that was designed for. So enough about nets. On to the next subject. Be a goodwill ambassador. And what do I mean by being a goodwill ambassador? It starts out with attitude, and be mindful that you are representing all of amateur radio operators in a very large geographical area, since repeaters and nodes are linked worldwide on the WiresX system. So remember that you're not only going out on your local repeater or node, you're going out on the WiresX system, and anybody anywhere in the world can be connected, or could be, and listening at the time. So keep in mind that what you say is going to be heard in all these different places. The question you need to ask yourself, if you're in a busy room especially, is, can this wait till someone disconnects from this busy room? Or is my conversation that important that the whole world needs to hear it? It's not a private conversation, folks. A lot of folks ask me, well, I connected in. I'm on that connection. No one else can hear it. No, you're not. It is a WiresX connection. It is not a private line. For the old school folks such as myself that remember what a party line is on a phone, yep, you've got the connection, but everybody listening on that particular machine is listening to not only you, but what you're hearing, they're hearing. So be courteous to your fellow amateur operators, remembering that the repeater and node is shared resource, and allow other stations time to use it as well. So if you're going to put it in a busy room, such as AmericaLink, and after about 15 minutes, you haven't engaged in the QSO, it's probably a good idea to either disconnect the room from the room and put the node back where it was, whether it's a repeater or a node, and clear and allow someone else the opportunity to use it. That's just being respectful and courteous to your fellow amateur radio operators. And speaking of changing rooms, before attempting anything related to switching or to another room or node, please refer to rule number 1, which is read the manual, be familiar with your radio. You got to be proficient in using that radio, because if you can start your car, it's good to know how to turn it off if you need to. So if you can connect, it's a good idea to be able to know how to disconnect, because if you don't, it's a runaway. The node is connected to the room and you did not disconnect it. So if you're on a repeater and you're wanting to connect to AmericaLink, for instance, or the Texas Nexus room, or any other room on the WiresX network, and the repeater is not already there, please call on the radio asking for permission before changing the node or room. Example, this is W4IOD. Is the repeater in use? I'd like to connect to the Texas Nexus room, and then unkey and wait for a response. Now, I do that Monday evenings when connecting the KK4FWU repeater to the MinWiz room. I actually do it 3 times to ask if the repeater is used and if there's any station on frequency that needs to use the repeater prior to me connecting to the MinWiz room. And I give it some time for stations to answer. You might not be answered, but it's courteous to ask first. So when you're done, like when I actually take the KK4FW repeater there in Lexington out of the MinWiz room after the net on Monday evenings, I announce the fact that we are back in the Lexington room and the repeater is turned to normal and customary amateur use. So it's only being respectful of not only to the repeater owners and trustees, but your fellow amateur radio operators. And while we're on that subject of connecting to another room, a lot of folks are under the impression, because I've been asked this more than once, if I'm doing WiresX, I have to press that DX button, that big one, right? No, you don't. If the repeater's in the room, you don't have to press anything. Only when you want to command where the node is do you need to launch that WiresX command menu. If the repeater is connected to the WiresX network and you're in a room and you don't want to change the room, all you need to do is turn your radio on, tune it to the appropriate frequency, and set your AF gain. The only time you need to launch the DX button, that is the command menu in WiresX, is when you want to disconnect from the room and go to another one. So hopefully that answers some of your questions. I will leave comments turned on. If you have any, go ahead and post them there. Thank you for your attention in this presentation. And actually, this document I will have to give credit to. It's been compiled with information from HAMOPERATOR.com. More specifically, WiresX the Bible, which is copyright 2016 by Whiskey Bravo 7 Oscar Echo Victor, which is Dewey, is a solid key. And my good friend Chris, K9EQ. Special thanks to K0YQ. That is my friend Chuck for compiling the information. And remember, the Bakken Amateur Radio Society Fusion Radio Net every Monday evening at 8:30 p.m., 7:30 p.m. Central. That is 0030 UTC. MinWiz WiresX room number 21493, YSF Reflector, US MinWiz Romeo Delta November Tango number 21493, and your net control stations are K0RRK Chuck, 80Mi Pete, K9EQ Chris, N0YQ Steve, and N0 Papa X-Ray Tango Shane. Not only do I consider it an honor and a privilege to work with these fine individuals, but to also call them my friends. Have fun, enjoy your radio and WiresX. W4IOD 73.